Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Steelers, Locked On Ravens. It's the rematch. We talk about how both teams have changed since this first meeting and a lot more here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your hosts, Chris Carter here of Locked On Steelers, Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens, and of course we are talking about a big AFC North matchup, division potentially on the line with this one. We'll get into all the craziness that's going to happen with this game, as well as all the factors that'll play into it. And as always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes of your favorite team, whether it's the Steelers or the Ravens. And today's episode is brought to you, Crossover Thursday is always brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. Kevin, it has been wild times for both of these teams since they last played. The Steelers have gone 2-2 in the 4-game stretch. The Ravens 2-1 with a bye. Both teams are in the heat of the AFC North race. The Steelers have a game up on the Ravens after they lost last week. The Ravens beat the Giants, and now these two teams are meeting in this game. If the Steelers win, they clinch the AFC North. The race is over, and then it's about wild card teams and seeding for the Steelers. If the Ravens win, it still will come down to the last two games of the season, where if the Steelers win out, they would still win the division because of tiebreakers. But of course, that becomes a bigger question with the Chiefs coming to town on Christmas. The Ravens going to play the Texans. Lots of stuff there. But one thing that's been noticeable on tape, one thing that's been noticeable to everyone, the Ravens' pass defense has gotten better than when it was. And it kind of started with their performance in the Steelers game. And the Steelers acknowledged that a lot when we talked to them in the Steelers locker room on Wednesday. What has been the impetus of that change, Kevin?
Yeah, Chris, there's a lot that goes into it. I think the big thing is after the Ravens beat the Bengals on Thursday Night Football the week before they played the Steelers, it's now come out that there was a very fiery closed door / open forum meeting between the defense and the coaching staff, players. And it was very much so hey, let's get all our issues out. Let's air everything out. And how can we get better? And so it wasn't like finger pointing and like, oh, you're doing this wrong. Like, you're terrible. Like, you get out of here. It was more so, hey, if you want to play, and Marlon Humphrey ended up saying this was kind of the message of the meeting. If you want to play, you want to win, you want to put in the work, you're going to have a spot on that field. If you don't, you're going to be on the bench. And that's exactly what's happened here, where Marcus Williams, their $70 million man, has not played for them. And it's been a while since he's been on the field for them. Eddie Jackson, who actually didn't make the trip to Pittsburgh due to personal reasons, and that ended up being he was unhappy with his role. The Ravens said, you're not playing well anyway. See you later. You're now off the team. But the big thing to me is they've moved Kyle Hamilton back to more of a traditional safety role. They've played him more. It's instead of putting them all around, putting them up at the line, middle of the defense, they've now moved him back. And it's now him and Ardarius Washington is the two safeties for the team. And that, I think, has calmed everything down on all three levels. It is, I guess, redefined certain roles, but in a good way. And I think the defense is playing more free with that, where you're not relying on another guy to do what Kyle Hamilton's doing right now. Hamilton can play anywhere. You can put him anywhere. He's that good. But to me, especially, you're right, the game against Pittsburgh really started this upward trajectory for them. It's been just about building confidence too. And partially the Ravens playing well, sometimes teams gifting the Ravens turnovers, like that Russell Wilson throw in the Pittsburgh game in the end zone. I know he was trying to darn out Washington was supposed to go up for that ball, but it just landed in the hands of Marlon Humphrey. And like, hey, that's a momentum play for you. That's great. So it's been a very, very good thing, because a lot of people in Baltimore, Chris, were wondering. It's like, well, the passing offense is great in Baltimore. The rushing offense is great. The rushing defense is great. Well, it's just that pass defense. If they can figure that out, they can be a very dangerous football team. And although you mentioned they're 2-1 before the bye and everything, I still think that this Baltimore Ravens team has done a tremendous job turning that secondary around.
I mean, it certainly has been. You look at the lack of explosive plays that they've allowed since that Steelers game, and even in that Steelers game, it speaks volumes to what they're doing there, and they're trying to play to their strengths, and that's sometimes what you need to do. Kyle Hamilton's a big part of this team's future, and letting him play to his strength, that seems like it makes a lot of sense. Moving Marlon Humphrey, inside a little bit more, that allows him to kind of get physical and make more plays like he did in that Steelers game. So I get the sense there that's a big part of this too. And the Steelers are trying to make their own changes. Now, granted, they're coming off a tough loss to the Eagles, but I do think that Russell Wilson started to find himself a little bit more in this offense after the Ravens game. They had a tough week against Cleveland in the snow, short week on the road. Blizzard hits mid game. It kind of changes things. But after that, they light up the scoreboard against the Bengals for 44 points. They outscore the Browns, and they kind of hold back at the end, just trying to run out the clock, 27 points there. But in both of those contests, Russell Wilson against the Bengals hits 10 different guys with passes. Against the Browns, 9 different guys. Now, against the Eagles, that changed up a little bit, and part of it, I think, is because the Eagles are just a really good defense, and George Pickens wasn't in the game, and so that kind of limited what they were doing. But I think that's where this game is going to come down to, is how much improved is the Ravens defense against a quarterback like Russell Wilson, because in the stretch since then, they played Justin Herbert, good quarterback, good passing attack, that came out on top. They played the Eagles, like the Steelers, didn't win that one, and then they beat up on the Giants. So Russell Wilson, interesting challenge for that, especially with the way that he attacked this Ravens defense. Is this a defense that can afford to, do 2 deep looks and protect against the deep ball while also defending the Steelers' run? I think that could be a big part of this game if they're able to pull that off, take away the deep ball while also taking away the run game.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge part for Baltimore, at least, being able to stop any explosive plays the Steelers offense might be able to make. And I know we're going to get into the availability of some of these guys a little bit later on in the show, but on the defensive side of the ball for Baltimore, it's going to be massive. Plus, with Pittsburgh, we know that, especially in that Eagles game, Pittsburgh, they didn't play their best football, but they were still in the game with some time left. And I know that people were kind of wondering, is Pittsburgh going to win the game? Who knows? But in my opinion, I think that when these two teams match up, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, and we've been talking for years, Chris, we know this. This is going to be one of those like slobber knocker games that's going to come down to the wire, and you can throw everything out the window. Doesn't matter how good each team is. It's just going to be one of those games. But it feels like there is a different mood, at least in Baltimore this week. Obviously, Ravens-Steelers week has rivalry. It's rivalry week. It's Steelers week, Ravens week. But we can be honest about this, Chris. I'll be honest about this. This really hasn't been a rivalry over the last handful of seasons, because Baltimore's lost 8 of their last 9 games to the Steelers, and the Ravens are mad about that. The Ravens want to rid that trend. And Roquan Smith, I think, put it best for both teams here. This is a check your manhood game, because everything is on the line here. AFC North crown. And from a Baltimore perspective, you cannot let a division rival, especially your most heated rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers, celebrate a division title on your home field. So they're going to do everything in their power to try to stop this. I think it's going to be a very intense, very physical game. And a lot of that, I think, too, is going to come down to which team is able to execute at a higher level, which, again, we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the show. But this Steelers team, they've had Lamar Jackson's number. Obviously, the defense has done their job on him over the course of Lamar's career. And actually, fun, or maybe not so fun fact, depending on how you look at it, is Lamar has only played in 1 game against the Steelers at home as a starter, and that was in 2020, back when they only allowed 4,000 fans in the stadium, because that was obviously the pandemic and going through all that. And Lamar has also never played both games in a season against Pittsburgh. So a lot of new milestones happening for a 7-year veteran quarterback in Lamar Jackson. I'm excited to see how it pans out.
Certainly I am too, because Lamar Jackson's a guy I've always had a high reverence for. Even when he was coming out of Louisville in the draft, I thought he was fantastic, and I thought the Steelers should be considering him at the time. And here he is playing really well for the Ravens, and the Steelers have just been that one team that he just hasn't figured out how to get over the hump. His only win is the game against Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph back in 2019 when he started against them there. And yes, since then, he's only played 4 other times, or 4 times since then. And, that's crazy to think about when you're in the same division. But That's been part of this rivalry is the unavailability of guys on both sides, and there's going to be some big questions about who might be unavailable in Pittsburgh. We'll talk about updates for T.J. Watt, George Pickens, and other key players next year, as well as other key battles to look at in this game, then how the matchups will form out. We'll get into all of that here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Oestreicher. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is also brought to you by the College Football Playoffs on TNT. It's that time of the year. The College Football Playoffs are back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff play begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. That leads to the first matchup. The SMU Mustangs battle the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Be sure to watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. The show is also brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it by scrolling through some mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, Intro to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and so many more amazing topics. All of Hillsdale courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or simply just enjoy the lectures if that's what you want to do. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, Kevin Oestreicher of Locked On Ravens. We're here talking all things in this big rematch. And again, the division potentially on the line. If the Steelers win, it's a clinch. If the Ravens win, they keep the race alive, and it comes down to the last two games of the season, where we've seen a lot of hard knocks drama going on. As of course we know, HBO Max or whatever they call it, they've been doing hard knocks in the entire AFC North, and now it's come down to just the Steelers and the Ravens. Kind of old school in how they're the two teams vying for the championship in the AFC North at the end of the season. But we talked about how Lamar's missed so many big games in this rivalry. The Steelers are hoping to not miss their best player, and that's T.J. Watt. He got injured late against the Eagles. I do think the Steelers got a big break in what it was. It looked like a non-contact ankle or Achilles injury initially. It turned out it was a lower ankle injury instead of a high ankle injury, which was a blessing. And I can tell you, Kevin, right now Mike Tomlin seems very confident about T.J. Watt's ability to play this week. When we talked to him at the top of the week on Monday, and then the Steelers, they've been working him in. We've seen videos from practice where he's been able to be part of the practices. The Steelers are certainly limiting him, but I think that TJ Watt, he's not a first or second or third year player who needs to go through reps. They're going to rest him until game day. I do think that TJ Watt will play in this game unless there's some unforeseen setback. However, the big question is still George Pickens, who has not officially practiced this week. We've seen videos of him doing drills at practice, showing that he's still fast, still explosive, but hamstring injuries are tricky. And I think those two being available, that's your best playmaker on offense for Russell Wilson. That's your best playmaker on the entire team. And, maybe the defensive player of the year, people are talking about, he's still in that conversation. On the other side of the ball, that's two big factors that both teams have to watch, including also Deshaun Elliott, who's been a really good safety for the Steelers this year. And the Ravens know he used to be over there.
Yeah. And if TJ Watt is unable to play, obviously that's a huge loss. Again, from what you said, Chris, seems like he might be able to go in this one. But I am really looking at the George Pickens situation, especially because when you talk about with what this Ravens team has, there's a lot of, sorry about the siren.
It's okay.
My bad on that. But that's for me, at least, with this Ravens team and the way this pass defense has played, there's a lot of different situations of, well, if George Pickens plays, that's the guy you have to stop. If George Pickens doesn't play, well, who do you stop? Is it Van Jefferson? Is it Calvin Austin? Is it, I mean, who is it going to be? Pat Frymuth's obviously an option in the passing game. You cannot discredit what he can do. But wide receiver wise, I already kind of favor Baltimore secondary, even with Pickens in there. You just have to kind of slow him down. But if Pickens is out, there's going to be so many other things that can go on. So for me, I think that if Pickens doesn't play, that's a huge loss for Pittsburgh. And we kind of saw last week that Steelers passing offense fizzle out without him, because I think he means so much, especially with the lack of depth that they have at that position.
No, I mean, one thing that Pickens gives you right away is the ability to throw deep and for him to go win those one-on-one balls. Russell Wilson likes to throw those. And now Russell Wilson's also shown he will do that to anybody. He completed one of those to Scotty Miller a couple of weeks ago, several yards downfield. Mike Williams has gotten some of those. But having George Pickens forces defenses to honor him. And if they don't, immediately, one-on-one, we're going that way. And if they do, well, know that there's two defenders someplace, and Russell Wilson's a smart quarterback. He quickly picks at that, and he will go another way. So injuries playing a big role in this one, but so will, I think, two key battles that these two teams are facing each other, and that involves turnovers and third downs. Now, last week, the Steelers gave up 10 third down conversions out of 17 attempts on the Eagles. That was the most third down conversions allowed in a single game by the Steelers defense all season. They dropped from being the second best third down defense to being the seventh best in a single week with their percentage points. Meanwhile, the Ravens' third down offense, second best in the league right now. They have been really clutch. The only team with a better third down percentage than them is the Kansas City Chiefs. To me, that's going to be a big part of this. Is, can the Steelers get back to playing really well on third downs? Can they win that? In the previous matchup, the Steelers defense kind of won out on third downs, 4 out of 11 for the Ravens. Granted, the Steelers offense didn't do too well either, 4 out of 16, but I feel like that point's been big, but also the turnover aspect. You talked about, we've talked about how Marlon Humphrey played a big role with that interception he had in the end zone. The Steelers responded with their own interception right after that. The Steelers are a plus 18, leading the NFL, tied with the Bills in their turnover differential. The Ravens are only a plus 2. And I think that those two things, third downs and turnovers, both teams are scheming up how to get the best advantages in those moments right now.
Yeah, and the Ravens are just not a high turnover team, both offensively or defensively. They rank 4th in the NFL and on offense with turnovers, and that's good, by the way, not in the bad way. In the good way,
in the sense that they've given up the 4th fewest giveaways in the league.
Yes, and then you have on defense, they're not that great. They have forced the 25th amount of turnovers this season. So, to me, the Ravens, if you want to win, it could come down to who has more turnovers at the end of the day here, because it gives your offense more opportunities. And with two very stout defenses, extra possessions could be, even if it just means you get an extra 3. Like we saw when Isaiah Likely fumbled that ball at the end of the half, that allowed Pittsburgh to get an extra 3 points. It was a 2-point loss for the 2-point win for the Steelers, 2-point loss for the Ravens. That plays a major role, because you don't know how that's going to go at the end of the game. So turnovers are going to be such a big part of this, I think, as you mentioned, the third down conversion ability, because for Baltimore, they have been so good with the third downs this season. And even on fourth down, they're going for it on nearly every 4th and 1, 4th and short, 4th and 2 situation, because you do have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Now, you have to get in those situations if you're the Ravens. Part of that, from Baltimore side, Chris, is don't commit penalties.
Yeah.
Just get out of your own way. Just don't do it. Don't let yourself trip up over your own feet, because Baltimore ranks dead last in almost every single statistical penalty category there is this season. Penalties against.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is. I have the numbers. It's penalties against, penalty yards against, net penalties, penalty yards per game, penalties per game. I could go on and on and on. They are 32nd in every single category. They average almost 8.5 penalties per game. They have almost 1,000 total penalty yards against them. And while they're still a 9-5 football team, especially in games like this, Chris, where we know it's going to come down to the wire in some way, shape, or form, a game-changing penalty can happen, especially when, let's say the Ravens, they get a nice 8-yard run on first down from Derrick Henry. Oh, no, holding. Now you're instead of 2nd and 2, it's 1st and 20. And that can derail drives. Defensively, even last week, the Ravens walked the Giants down the field with penalties. The Giants scored 14 points. John Harbaugh was very clear, and he was very upset about it. It was very clear that those scoring drives don't happen without the defensive penalties. So they have to get out of their own way because any team can take advantage of that, especially Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. And to our points here, the Steelers won out on penalties. The Ravens had 12 for 80 yards. The Steelers had 7 for 45 the last time these two teams met. And the Steelers won out in turnovers. The Ravens had 3. The Steelers had 1. And those key parts there. And talking about sustaining drives or extending drives with penalties, the Steelers won time of possession by almost 13 minutes in the last game. That's almost an entire quarter of football that their offense got to possess the ball more. That's something that the Ravens cannot allow this time around. And if they do, it plays more into the hands of the Steelers in the way that they want to play football. So that's why third downs, turnovers, and penalties all key to managing this game. And again, a game that both you and I think are expected to go down to the last minute or so. Who's going to make the last play at the end of the game? But we get into more of those matchups personnel-wise. Who's going to be locking horns in this upcoming matchup? We'll do that next here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Oestreicher, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel because they are America's #1 sportsbook. You can bet on the NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB, college sports, fight sports, and so many more things right on FanDuel.com, or download the FanDuel app today to get started. With right now, the Steelers have been remaining all week long as 6.5-point road underdog to the Ravens. Well, the Ravens look to get revenge from the Steelers' win earlier this season to prevent being swept. The Steelers' money line currently has moved up slightly to plus 235. The Ravens' money line also moving up to minus 290, with the over-under now up by a point from 44.5 points to now at 45.5 points. Where will you put your money this week? Be sure to do so with FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel today. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first bet of $5 or more today. That's $150 of free bets today to new customers if you hit on just your first bet of $5 or more. Only on FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com today to download America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Chris Carter, Kevin Oestreicher breaking things down for you on this leading into this Saturday matchup. A reminder, this is a Saturday kickoff, so do not turn on your TV Sunday thinking that you're expecting these teams. It throws off my week, Kevin. I keep thinking Monday is Tuesday. I keep thinking Tuesday is Monday. I'm like, what is happening? Like, everything's different. Mike Tomlin talked on Monday. I'm like, when does that happen for the Steelers? It's been a batty week for sure. For both sides, I'm sure. But I think one thing we look at in this game and we see like, hey, who's going to make the biggest impact in the game? The Steelers had T.J. Watt get a sack in the last time these two teams met. They were able to kind of get the pass rush going. If T.J. Watt does play, I think that does play a big factor. But also it's going to play a big factor is Alex Highsmith has been back, and he's been very good as well. I think that's still going to be a big part about this. How have you seen the Ravens offensive line play since their last matchup with the Steelers? Have you seen growth, kind of the same thing? What's been going on with them? Because that's going to be how the Steelers stop the Ravens, is if their defensive front continues to hold down those rushing lanes.
Yeah, and I think that Pittsburgh's defensive line is a textbook example of a line that does give the Ravens offensive line issues. They struggle with more physical defensive fronts. Kansas City with guys like Chris Jones over there. Obviously, what Pittsburgh brings to the table with their plethora of guys. Philadelphia dominated them from start to finish in the trenches because of just how physical they are defensively. So when there aren't as many physical guys, the Ravens offensive line looks great. And it's really on the interior. Guys like Patrick McCary, Daniel Falele, which sometimes struggle with those physical players. Roger Rosengarten's been incredible as a rookie, really has settled in there at the right tackle position. Ronnie Stanley's had a bounce-back season. He bet on himself, actually chopped the last year off of his deal to bet on himself this year, and it certainly seems like it's going to pay off for him. And then Tyler Linderbaum is one of the best centers, if not the best center in the NFL right now. So The offensive line has had to gel and grow. Certainly was a point of contention at the start of the season, and they've had to certainly go through some downs to get to where they are today. But it's going to be because Pittsburgh's defensive front was able to have some success against that Baltimore offensive line the first time around. And, while TJ Watt might not be 100%, Alex Highsmith missed the last time these two teams played together. And obviously Nick Herbig played a big role in that game for Pittsburgh. So they're able to rotate guys in, keep guys fresh, and you don't lose a ton of physicality when you talk about some of the other players that they have. So I think for Baltimore's offensive line, and part of it also, Chris, is Lamar Jackson is just so good at avoiding sacks, where you're never going to look at a Lamar Jackson-led team. It's never going to really be a high sack number. Mm-hmm. It might be a little bit, but we always see Lamar break out to the outside, juke a guy, go up the field, roll out in the pocket. So it's always a multi-step process to actually bring in Lamar down. You have to actually get past the offensive line, and then you have to find some way, somehow, to bring down Lamar Jackson. But overall, I'm a little concerned about the physicality of Pittsburgh's defensive front, but I do think that if they can find a way to overcome that, they'll be in decently good shape.
I think that's certainly a big part of this matchup is can you keep them from taking over the game? Because so often they do, even when they don't, bring you down for a sack. If they move you from your launch spot, if they force you to get off rhythm, and if they don't allow Lamar Jackson to turn, in some of his crazier plays, like when he runs around for 2 minutes and then throws a touchdown like he did against the Bengals, if you keep those plays from happening, you kind of force Baltimore have to earn everything they get. And I think that's how they've done it. And that's something that we asked Terrell Austin, Steelers defensive coordinator, about, is like, hey, how much of this is scheme versus just like you guys just happen to have this is a great time to have some great edge rushers. And he's like, listen, he's like, yeah, we can take credit for all the scheme we want, but TJ Watt's a game changer. And, the fact that he's usually available for this game plays a big reason into why we win these games a lot. And, why we have won those games. And so that's where the Steelers are coming from when they're talking about it. But, on the flip side, the Ravens had their own crasher, the game, and Odafe Owe, who took over the game for 2.5 sacks in this one. I see it as a questionable designation there, Kevin. Is that just a precaution for a light injury, or is that something of concern?
Yeah, I think it's probably more of a precaution at this point. I think when you're looking at Baltimore's injury report, 4 did not practices in Nelson Aguilar is dealing with a concussion. Jalen Armour-Davis, one of the backup corners, he has a hamstring injury. Then you have Justice Hill, who for personal reasons didn't practice on Thursday. He was available on Wednesday. So depending on what that situation is, we'll see his availability. And then Deontay Johnson, former Pittsburgh Steelers legend, is not practicing again. Yeah, there you go. After he, again, refused to enter the game against Philadelphia. And that's been a whole topic of conversation surrounding him and whether he'll be released, whether they'll keep him on the team. And he's the other guy. But for Odafe Owe, you have some other limited people here as well. Rashad Bateman with a foot injury. Adisa Isaac, he actually was a full participant on Thursday after being limited on Wednesday. Ardarius Washington, their new safety, is limited twice with an ankle injury. So I think this is just you're going to be more cautious, Chris, I think, when you have 3 games in 11 days. I mean, you're going to probably be a little more conservative in terms of, we might just rest you instead, get you the extra rest to make sure you're all good, because they have another game coming up after Saturday on Wednesday. Both these teams do. So I'm not, in terms of who the biggest player that might miss this game for the Ravens, I guess I would call it Nelson Aguilar, because I think apparently Justice Hill situation, depending on what it is, he'll probably play. So Ravens are in a pretty healthy spot right now. Hopefully it stays that way. But of course, it's the NFL and you never know how that goes.
You never know how that goes. I mean, heck, the Steelers thought they had George Pickens ready to go a couple weeks ago, and then he just, pulls a hammy on the Friday before the game, and now he's missed 2 games, and they're wondering if he'll miss a 3rd game, maybe even a 4th game if they're trying to protect him for the playoffs. I think that's another factor here, is that whereas this stretch is rough, the Steelers are clinched in the playoffs. The Ravens have like a 99% chance of making the playoffs right now. So, like, I think both of these teams are also looking at this like, yes, you wanted to win the division, but you also don't want to put anyone on the line because both of these teams, I think, feel like right now, like they can go be dangerous in the playoffs and beat some of these good teams in the AFC. I mean, the Ravens have already done it with the way they whooped up on the Bills. The Steelers, they're 4-1 against playoff teams this year. I think that's certainly something that they're considering is, hey, this 3 games in 11 day stretches, don't need to kill yourself over this. You just need to get through this for the most part healthy. Do want to win those games. Don't want to pull people back if they can play. But I think that's certainly in calculation here. But I want to finish on this point that you brought up here about Deontay Johnson, because I feel like that is one of the things that when that trade happened between the Ravens and the Panthers, I immediately went like, great. Now we're going to have to talk about this every time for the next, like, however long that he stays in Baltimore, that he's going to play against the Steelers. And then in that first game, he's like a non-factor entirely. And then he's a non-factor entirely for the Ravens. And then I cannot believe that you choose to not go into a game. And, and now it's like the team they've mutually agreed to not participate in activities, which, if they're not cutting him, that tells me they're probably not doing so because they don't want him to just be snatched up by the Steelers and thrown in their receiving department. Granted, I'm not sure if the Steelers would do that, considering you were not a good teammate in Carolina. You were not a good teammate in Baltimore. And that's why they traded him away from Pittsburgh, was because they were like, let him, you know what? We'll take on Dante Jackson, who, by the way, has 5 interceptions this year.
It's been a whirlwind, and the fact that we are talking about this much drama here in Baltimore for a player that's been so unusual. He's been on the team for, like, I think now it's 2 months or just under 2 months. It's crazy. You're right. It's unusual for the Ravens, and they can survive without him. Obviously, Baltimore needed a depth wide receiver at the deadline. I don't know if they thought a guy like Deontay would be available for so little, because he is a talented player on the field.
He is.
But as you mentioned, there have been effort issues. There have been questions about his fit in locker rooms. And now it's 3 stops with 3 problems for Deontay. And the thing that I keep bringing up, Chris, is if you're a young team, you have a young wide receiver you want mentored, a young quarterback you want mentored, are you bringing Deontay Johnson into your locker room after having 3 separate incidents in 3 separate organizations? I don't necessarily completely agree with how Baltimore used him. I think he should have been on the field more than they actually did use him. But once you quit on your team, it opens up a whole different can of marbles. That is something you cannot do. We obviously have seen it in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it's a different approach. Obviously, San Francisco has been very clear. They're just roasting them left and right. And yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But the Ravens have kind of taken we'll see. It's not a distraction. Like, they've taken a different approach. But clearly, if I had to guess, I'd probably say Deontay's played his last snap. And again, you're relying on guys like Nelson Aguilar, Tylan Wallace, Tez Walker to step up with Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. And Todd Monken actually went kind of wild at practice on Wednesday because they were doing a ball security drill, because obviously you remember Derrick Henry had the fumble on the opening possession of the game against the Steelers the first time around, and ended up Todd Monken ran over. He's like, no, you're doing it. And then look, punch it out the ball this way, and showed leadership, and everybody in Baltimore loved that. So Deontay, it was always going to be a risk reward situation. Obviously in this situation, unfortunately, the risk has far outweighed the reward, and now Baltimore has to deal with a very public drama situation.
Well, we'll see what happens in this game. We both have Friday episodes to get to here to finish out the week. Final updates and we'll look at some injury talk as well as in those days. Keep a close eye to see on both injury reports to see who all will be available in this one. Kevin, thanks as always for doing a great crossover episode with me. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. These are always great. These games are always great too. So I think we have something really good to look forward to here. You can find me obviously over on Locked On Ravens 5 days a week, just like Locked On Steelers. And I'll be live after the game. So win, lose, tie, hopefully not a tie. We don't like ties over on Locked On Ravens. That's the thing.
That'd be terrible.
No ties. But if you want the Ravens perspective on what happened in the game, be sure to come over to Locked On Ravens and hear what I got to say on it. And you can also find me over at the Ravens Wire for my written content, Bleacher Report. I do some work over there as well. And you can find me over on social media at Chaos Striker 34.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you for doing this with me as always. And as always, I'm Chris Carter. You can follow my work on at Carter Critiques on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, all the social medias. That's my handle. You can also find me at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette where I do my writing work. I did a film study on the Steelers' struggles on third downs against the Eagles and why I think they need to adjust against the Ravens. Post-Gazette.com for all our written work there. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, just like you find Kevin on Locked On Ravens on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, whether it's on the Steelers or the Ravens, for whichever side you choose. We're both back tomorrow, finishing out the week with Friday, and then Saturday it's Steelers at Ravens for a big one. We'll see you there for an AFC North matchup.